Good afternoon, class. Welcome back. I want to take just a little further the comments I was trying to make in class today about the second industrial revolution and how it essentially works, how the role specifically that technology and innovation played within it, and also how it sort of strengthened the hold of the core, or in this case the West, the developed industrializing and industrialized countries of the world, the nation states of the world, and how their imperial expansion, how that played out and impacted some of the other parts of the world. Like we spent a little time today talking about Latin America. I'll leave this topic for you. I'll just quickly click over these slides. I made some comments at the beginning of class today. We have our objectives. We started talking about the triangle of domination that is sort of important European export, I guess also United States export during the late 1800s. There are numerous ways in which the development of peripheral regions of the world economy, there are specific ways in which development is carried out that doesn't really allow for all regions of the world to benefit equally in the industrial capitalist expansion that's taking place as a result of the second industrial revolution. We talked a little bit about the changing appetites and the changing economic health and prosperity of the core and how that gave way to certain new products that were in demand, how this affected regions like Latin America. In some ways it was a good story. It was it was positive news because the number of exports, the level of exports definitely was significant, particularly in the late 1800s. However, in some ways it was the setup for later problems in the world economy, particularly as regions of the world like Latin America are going to experience them, because they're not learning the skills, they're not developing the economic infrastructure to really allow them to have an independent role to play in the global economy. It seems like the stage is being set for regions like Latin America to always be dependent for its economic well-being on other regions of the world with a global economy. So there we go. We left off here, and I want to just suggest railroads are not obviously just unique to Latin America. They are being expanded throughout really all parts of the globe, starting in the late 1800s. But railroads do create or provide quite a useful microcosm. Again, a small snapshot that tells the story of a larger whole. In many ways, these railroads are a perfect example of that triangle of domination that I was talking about in class earlier today, where you have foreign capital, which is being invested to allow for railroads to be constructed, foreign expertise, the engineers that are laying out and designing the tracks and the engineering and planning that goes with such an epic engineering feat, such as a railroad line. And then also the management. It's no easy task to, even if you have the engineering and skills to build, it still takes quite a bit of logistics and planning to bring together the labor, to bring together the materials, to secure the lands and passageways that will be a necessary part of railroad construction. So they're a useful microcosm. So railroads are a powerful symbol, partly because they are essentially the infrastructure or the transport channels that allow for much of the economic growth that's going to take place during the second industrial revolution. As we mentioned, in Latin America, where certain export crops or export commodities, whether it's bananas, coffee, nitrates, wheat, beef, these sorts of things, they're going to be vastly served. These industries are going to be well served by the fact that there are now going to be railroad tracks that help unite the interiors of the developing world in the case of Latin America, with the ports on the coasts, which then of course connect these world regions with the core, those places back in Europe or in the United States that have a tremendous appetite and demand for many of these natural resources and commodities or goods being created in various places. It's worth noting that modernization and industrialization are not always welcome. Part of that is cultural. There might be people who live on the vast plains, the pampas of Argentina, for example, in southern South America, that don't necessarily want to see their culture transformed into a extension of the European core economy. But the other part is that the way in which industrialization and modernization take place, it really benefits, particularly in places like Latin America, a relative few, a small group of elites and landowners. And in many cases, it's the elites and landowners that are driving these changes and driving Latin America's participation in the second industrial revolution, because it's going to profit them far more than it will the everyday Latin Americans, or in the case of Africa, everyday Africans, or everyday Southeast Asians, so on and so forth. So the social hierarchy that I introduced you all to in Latin America a couple weeks ago, where we have at the top the Peninsulares, and then the second level are the Creoles, and then the mestizos and mulattoes, and then the Indians and blacks. You can look at that same social hierarchy, which was of colonial Latin America. And now we could probably take off that top level, the Peninsulares. But from the Creoles on down, the benefits of this new role in the global economy are going to fall disproportionately to those who are higher up on that social pyramid. Indians and blacks are not going to benefit. In fact, they will become, in many ways, laborers and low-skilled laborers in this new economy. So moving on to the Industrial Revolution, which of course was a driver of the railroads. It's a driver of the economic changes that are taking place in various parts of the world, and we focus largely on Latin America today. But there are going to be a number of other qualities that are worth at least brief note that sort of separate the Industrial Revolution, the Second Industrial Revolution, from that of the first. And we know that Western Europe is going to be in charge, but Japan will also start participating in this. We'll be talking about Japan as the course develops, but Japan took a different fork in the road from China. When China sort of clung to its old traditional ways and found itself floundering at the hands of its competition with Great Britain, Japan is going to actually look to an industrial and modernizing future. And so Japan will be a participant in the Second Industrial Revolution. But among the highlights, or I shouldn't say highlights, among the primary differences of the Second Industrial Revolution is now the emphasis for energy is going to come from organic sources. So think coal, think petroleum. We're going to be burning our energy. Whereas in the earliest steps, there was some coal in the earliest Industrial Revolution, but mostly it was water and wind power that drove a lot of the early factories. Not the case. We're going to be wholeheartedly burning our energy, and of course that has tremendous consequences for the world around it, and some of these consequences we are feeling now more than ever in conversations about global climate change and the use of fossil fuels, carbon emissions that are at the heart of concerns over global climate change. A second difference is a reliance upon electricity. So we're going to start to see, starting in the developed world, but also spreading outward from there, that electricity will become a everyday amenity, an everyday luxury that more and more people will start to experience. And this is important because electricity is going to give way to its own economy as well. Not only does electricity make production an easier thing for Western nations, but it also is going to create demand for products because, of course, things like appliances will start to be in demand as the electricity revolution takes place. There's going to be a shift from materials such as iron to that of steel. Steel is much stronger and lighter than iron. It had been around previously. However, the big development for the second industrial revolution is that the price of steel, the cost of producing steel, is going to go down tremendously. And this picture here this is a Bessemer steel furnace, which allows for a much more efficient production of steel. The cost of steel will go down. It'll be 1/10 of as expensive as it had been before. So this will be really useful for railroad tracks, for the construction of buildings, those steel I-beams that we associate with 21st and 20th century construction. All of those are made possible by the arrival of steel. And then, of course, another revolution is important, and we've touched upon this a little bit in the Triangle of Domination, but it's the arrangement of capital. In the United States, a major breakthrough will be the joint stock company. And corporations, which are stock-selling businesses, are really important to the accumulation of capital because individuals will buy shares. And by collecting the small amounts of money that people have in their own personal savings, it activates a lot more resources for the upfront costs of starting a business and developing the potential and the scale of a business. So large banks play a role here too, but it's the joint stock companies that really give the second industrial revolution the capital it will need to attempt really big ideas like railroad construction and factory expansion and widespread construction, which builds the urban centers around these industrial revolution centers. So, and then finally, I'll note here, labor. Labor is going to be an important part of this industrial revolution because people will start moving around the globe to accommodate the demands that the second industrial revolution has for people's labor. So Chinese citizens will move to the United States to help build railroads. Eastern European immigrants will be coming into the United States to help feed the requirements of things like packing companies in Chicago, meat packing companies. And we'll see a tremendous shuffling of populations in the world to accommodate the growing needs of labor. Okay, and I'll just finally close here. We have, along with this transformation, economic breakthroughs and transport of peoples, the innovations that are happening at this time. There's an innovation in thought, and it's not necessarily a positive one. In the mid-1800s, Charles Darwin wrote a pioneering book called The Origin of Species, and in that book he laid out the basis of natural selection, which is a mechanism by which the theory of evolution might operate. And he puts forth the idea that, as evident in certain bird species, if we go back and we look at them over long periods of time, we sense slight difference in the physical traits, and these traits in different times better qualify a certain organism, a certain individual of bird, gives it an advantage for existence. Well, these ideas, which could be distilled down to the idea of survival of the fittest, are going to be adopted for social science purposes, and social Darwinism becomes a powerful idea. It doesn't have much at all to do with Charles Darwin, other than it uses his theory of survival of the fittest and applies it to different groups of people on the globe. And people start to conclude that Europeans are more fit to survive and thrive than, say, Africans or Native Americans, so on and so forth. With that, I'll stop. Thank you.